Steph here from thegoodride.com. We are here looking at the Weston Revel in a 148. This is Weston's first women's specific swallowtail, so it's pretty exciting. There's not that many women's specific swallowtails out there. There's a lot of unisex boards, there's a lot of men's boards that come a little smaller. So this is awesome because it's made specifically for women's specs, and it comes in some smaller sizes. So it comes in a 143, a 148, and a 153. This board is a little bit wider under the feet, so under the waist in the middle here on the 148, it's 252 millimeters across the waist, and the 143 is 246, and the 153 is 256. So a pretty wide board. And then you get obviously a very directional shape. So you have this big old nose up here and a swallowtail on the bottom here, and it comes tapered, so it comes with 25 millimeters of taper from the tip to the tail in the 148. So it's quite a bit of taper. It's very directional. You get the swallowtail that helps the board go down in the powder, and this big old nose that helps it float. For the camber profile, it has a setback camber. So the positive camber is back here, kind of in between the feet, going to a really long rocker on the nose, and maybe a little bit on the tail, but it's basically like a camber coming down to here. What that gives you is a super directional float. You still get energy, control, and stability under the feet. This comes with a sintered Durasurf, and so it comes with a high quality sintered base that's going to give you a lot of good glide out there and keep it going pretty fast. And then the flex is a 5 out of 10 flex. Let's see if we can flex this here. It seems like a little softer in the nose just because of that rocker, and then right here it gets a little stiffer in the waist, but it's not extremely stiff, and it is soft enough to twist it and maneuver it and move it around in different types of terrain. I got to test this on our giant powder dump that we got here in the Eastern Sierras at the beginning of the season. It was like a 4 to 5 foot storm. I was up in Palisades, Tahoe during the storm, so I was able to get a few fresh laps there in some deep stuff. Yeah, and this board floated really, really well. It was a ton of fun. It wasn't really light snow, it was a little bit of a heavier type snow, but it was definitely really, really deep. Even on kind of mellow, more low angle powder runs, the Revel had great float in that, and I could still like turn through it, you know, and like have some fun in it. I didn't have to just straight line. We're gonna just start off with powder because that is what this board was designed for. And it definitely had a ton of float and powder. I feel like this is one of the boards that you could take to Japan. You could take it on those deep, deep days. You could take it to the Pacific Northwest on the deep, heavy days, and it should handle no problem there. But what I like about it is that it still has that positive camber. It still has a little bit of technicality to it. Sometimes when you get powder-specific boards, that's all they are good for is powder, you know, and there's not too much edge hold and there's not too much like energy out of turns. This board is a nice mix of like, one, you can float effortlessly. It doesn't take a lot of energy to float, but you can also move the board around and kind of like surf in the powder. But then two, you can ride it over some crud snow and some crappy kind of like if there's wind blowing and you got some icy scraped off stuff, you can ride it across that and feel fine and then get to the next powder stash. So yeah, it has all the ingredients that you want to see in a swallowtail for helping with float and powder. You get the massive nose with the rocker on it. You have the wider waist width underfoot, swallowtail, the taper, and the setback kind of camber stance. So you're already kind of, the reference stance is here, and so you get a little bit more of setback options, but if you did want it a little bit more directional, you do have one more option to set it back from reference stance. Even through trees, when the snow is really deep, it handled great. It can maneuver and turn really quickly, and it stays afloat. It's kind of like, because of the taper and the swallowtail, it definitely floats more like this. So you're kind of like working the nose above, but the nose doesn't really ever go under the snow. And if it does, it'll come back up because of the way it's shaped. So that's really nice. But what I like about it is it's not a super aggressive board. And so this is friendly enough for an intermediate rider to get on and have a lot of fun on a powder day. But it's also enough board that if you're a more advanced rider, it's gonna be fun and stable for you as well at higher speeds. After my powder day up there, I took it to June Mountain just to kind of get it in some different terrain and non-powder terrain. Let's start with the steeps. The personality of the Revel changed a little bit when I wasn't in soft snow. In soft snow, 100% love this board, really, really fun. In harder snow, I could start to feel the waist width, and especially the waist width under my front foot. And so my style of riding is I love initiating turns with the front foot and like moving towards the back. And it made the turning initiation for me a little bit slower. So this board likes to be ridden like underneath you. So if you start on the front foot, it wants to be moved towards the back foot, kind of like a little bit more of that surfy type feel to it. It likes those slashy turns. It likes moving across the length of the board through your turns. It really likes that. Just staying in the center isn't too fun because I feel like that's where I really felt the waist width, and it was a little bit more clunky that way. The steeper the terrain, the faster it turned for me. So I actually did like this on steeps because it was a little bit easier for me to initiate the turn, and it had a really nice edge hold, and it was very stable. Even for a 5 out of 10 flex, it had a nice stable feel in steep terrain. And I felt like it was very consistent and reliable up there. And then again, the positive camber just allows you to have a nice connection in those scrapey, icy, kind of crappy snow conditions. I still felt like it could hold an edge and it was reliable there. Yeah, so then taking it off piste, again, I loved it in soft snow. And as the snow got harder, it was less fun to turn, but you could turn it. And so what I feel like is this is the 148, and I feel like all these things I'm saying about it turning a little slower for me, I think if I got it in the 143, it would be right on money for me and my specs. So perhaps that is how to solve this puzzle, is if you're a bigger rider, I think it's gonna turn a lot quicker for you in harder snow conditions. But for me, this was a little bit like slower to turn off piste as well, especially again, in more mellow terrain where I could feel the edge transition of the waist width. But it can totally do it. And I did ride it off piste, and I rode it through trees, and I rode it through some bumpy stuff, and it handles fine. It's just slightly slower than I would like it to be. And so that's why I feel like if I was on the 143 instead of the 148, I think this would be like super fun. If you size yourself correctly, check out the specs and make sure that that's like what works for you according to your specs, and it should be fun in a variety of different terrains that way. Yeah, so just a couple centimeters, a little big for me for the all mountain freeride terrain, but it felt right on point for me in like deep powder in all sorts of like off-piste trees and stuff like that. So bringing it down to groomers, the Weston can definitely handle some groomers. It's stable enough for higher speeds, but what I like about it is you don't have to ride it super fast to kind of maneuver it around. For me, I didn't really like slow speeds, but when I was riding it in a medium to fast speed, it handled great, but it kind of preferred a little bit more of an open turn and like a medium to large radius. It wasn't an extremely turny board unless you were doing like quick slash turns. Just kind of riding it from edge to edge, it was more of a medium to large radius turner in groomer conditions. Again, if you're riding this in powder and soft snow, it can turn very quickly. It's a fast turning board, and it feels kind of loose and free flowing in deeper snow. But when you get it onto hard pack, it kind of changes its personality a little bit, and it becomes a little bit more locked in and a little bit more stable feeling. That's where I feel like I could really start to feel the positive camber and the waist width. So it's a little bit more of a hard charging board on harder snow conditions, and then a little bit more free-flowing and fun-loving in softer snow conditions. But really fun to carve. I almost got a couple circles out of it, but I just ran out of speed. Because of the wide waist width, you can definitely lay it over, and you're not going to have a problem carving this board. Especially if you get a little faster and you start carving, it has nice energy from turn to turn. Really fun cardboard. A little bit more of that, again, kind of surfy. It wants you to move towards the back foot. So it's kind of a board that wants to be worked underneath you. And so it has a little bit of that, this acceleration as you move it towards the back foot in a carve or just in turns in general. So pretty fun on groomers, but again, a little bit more of a locked in feel when you get on the hardback terrain. Riding it switch, it's a little awkward riding it switch. You can do it, but it's kind of scary. You get like that, the whole snow shooting up there. And like I said, it's a little bit more locked in feel, and so it doesn't really slide around in a circle quite as fluidly in hardpack terrain. Yeah, so not really a board to ride switch on, but it's really fun off some little lips and some natural features. And so the Freestyle Personality, you know, it's not a freestyle board. You're not throwing huge spins on this thing, but it has some fun personality to it. It does have a fun side. Natural features, little drops or something like that. Yeah, I can definitely do that. It's really, really stable. You have a good, nice platform to land on. So if you're hitting like powder jumps or like a little rock drop or something, you're gonna land and it'll probably come out no problem, especially with this big nose, as long as you're not landing the switch. So fun enough to play on, you know, some rock drops or cliff drops on a powder day, or like pillow lines and stuff like that. Overall, who is the Weston Revel for? If you're a solid intermediate rider to advanced expert, you're looking for a fun, floaty, kind of surfy powder board, a board that can also ride on Groomers and like get you through that icy crud. The Revel would be good for that. It's a fun-loving board that likes a little bit of that more surfy type ride. You know, it has that swallowtail personality. It's tapered, but it's not super aggressive. And so it's stable enough to ride at higher speeds, but if you're just kind of getting into it and you want your first swallowtail board, it's not a really aggressive board, so it's friendly enough for that. Rippin' powder boards, super, super fun on real deep days. You're looking for a board to take over to Japan, or, you know, a board to have in the quiver for when it dumps. The Revel could be good for that. So it's a look at the Weston Revel in a 148. If you're looking for the complete write-up and review, head over to thegoodride.com to check it out.